our officers will not hesitate to enforce the law and make arrests where warranted.
Chief, your leadership of TPS and TPS has faced a lot of criticism over how the protests have been handled over the last year. I think to the officers handing coffee and donuts over to the protesters on the Avenue Road Bridge, the shutdown of the Prime Minister's dinner with the Italian Prime Minister. So, given the track record, why should people feel confident that things will be better as the protesters are clearly saying they're coming out for a big celebration of the one-year anniversary of the attack?
I appreciate your perspective, Brian, but I will tell you that, we've repeatedly talked about the entire context of what we're dealing with. And I think it's important to reflect on the fact that our members have risen to the challenge our city has faced day in and day out to over 1,500 events. And while I appreciate your perspective, I think we need to take it in context of the entire set of circumstances we're facing. And we have very much engaged with our communities and been present in our communities on the ground where communities meet and gather, as well as demonstrations and gatherings to ensure the safety of those events. And I believe that our members have done an incredible job keeping our city safe during what has been a very challenging time for our communities.
The challenge, but if you could expand on the context, and you mentioned arrests and you mentioned flags. Over the past couple of weeks, we've started seeing Hezbollah flags on the streets of Toronto. And what I hear from the Jewish community is, why is that allowed? Why aren't people arrested immediately? So if you could address those two things. What is the context that you're saying you are doing a good job? And could you talk about why people aren't arrested quickly with the flags? Because they feel intimidated and quite frankly scared by people.
I'll start an answer, Brian, and then turn it over to the superintendent responsible for our intelligence unit in our hate crime unit. I very much wanted to stress and reassure the community that we continue to investigate every reported incident. And I specifically spoke to flags for that reason, because we understand the concerns in our communities. And, I share a concern around the presence of materials that promote terrorist entities as identified by Public Safety Canada. And we gather the evidence and act as quickly as we can based on the evidence that is before us. And perhaps the superintendent can add a little more context as required.
Good afternoon. So in speaking to the flag issue, yes, I'm very much aware that there were Hezbollah flags that were observed at a recent protest. I just want to bring confidence to the fact that that is an ongoing investigation. I personally have been involved with conversations about that with the Ministry of Attorney General Hate Crime Working Group, and that the possession of flags in a protest would go towards the charge of a public incitement of hatred. Public incitement of hatred is a complicated charge. There's 5 elements to be met. Flags is just one element of that. But I just want to assure that this is incredibly active. We are looking at the potential of charges in this case, and that we will move forward. If we reach that threshold, we will move forward. Thank you.
Could you explain the threshold just quickly?
The threshold of public incitement of hatred is that it has to be a form of communication. There has to be an audience. There has to be a hate symbol. In this case, it would be the flag. And probably the most complicated element of that offense is it has to have the likely breach of the peace. And the likelihood of a breach of the peace can be subjective in some cases. We are looking at collecting evidence around that set of circumstances involving those flags of how do we establish a likelihood breach of the peace. But I want to assure you that we are looking at all evidence, and I feel confident with our investigators that if we do reach that threshold, we will definitely lay charges in this case.